Good evening. You are watching ThinkTech Asia, and I'm David Day. This evening we're going to be talking about a topic that perhaps you don't know a whole lot about, but which has significant ramifications here in the Asia-Pacific region. We're going to be talking about Indonesia's upcoming elections, fork in the road. And this is a time when the country truly is at a fork in the road. And to help us with this conversation, we are going to pull in former Indonesia expert, well, currently an Indonesia expert, but former ambassador from Washington, D.C., Ambassador Alphonse LaPorta. And Al, are you there with us now?
I am indeed, and it's great to be back with you.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador LaPorta has been an advisor to our Pacific Command here at Pearl Harbor on matters involving Southeast Asia. He's the former president of the U.S.-Indonesia Society and has worked in the State Department on Indonesia matters for some 13 years. And so we are, Al, just delighted to have you with this important program on the we're right in the midst of the mess of a robust democracy, which is an election process. And for those of you who do not know, Indonesia is a robust democracy. It is the largest Muslim majority country in the world, and the important word in that sentence is majority. It is also the fourth largest country in the world by population. And Al, let me go to you. Help me with this now. Do you happen to know the number of islands that encompass Indonesia?
Well, it's about 17,000. But more than that, the electorate is 187 million people are eligible to go to the polls on July 9 to elect a new president.
You know, Al, at the outset of this program, we have described, or I have described Indonesia as really being at a fork in the roads, a real crossroads. And as we go through this program, one of these candidates is linked with Indonesia's military past, and the other, and that candidate, former son-in-law of the deposed Suharto president, linked with all kinds of challenges which we'll get into. And the other is a political outsider and a populist. And Al, what we want to do for this program is to help our viewers understand that both of these gentlemen have very different visions of Indonesia's future. And if one of them is elected, there may be a serious impact or a change in the relationship with the United States. And so let's get into this kind of at the beginning here for those in our audience who don't know much about Indonesia. And control room, if we could bring up visual number G, which is a map of Indonesia, just to help. And Al, maybe if you could talk a little bit about the country generally for those viewers and listeners who don't really know about Indonesia.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Indonesia is a big place, 17,000 islands, over 2,000 ethnic and language groups. It is majority Muslim, but it also has a large kind of nominal Muslim population. They're not all very strict Muslims, but also Indonesia has kind of a significant non-Muslim minority. Not only minority Christians, and they separate Roman Catholics from Christians. So you have Christians and Roman Catholics, but you also have Hindus. And the island of Bali, for example, is entirely Hindu,
right,
in its character. And also you have a large population of Buddhists and Confucianists. So these are not all imported Chinese populations, but they are important domestically as well. So it is correct to describe Indonesia as multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and since 1999, in the fall of Suharto, President Suharto, Indonesia has been decidedly democratic. In 1999 and 2001, changes to the Constitution were passed that limited the military's role in government. It also established the direct election of the president and other high government officials, including governors. And it also enacted human rights guarantees, put them right into the Constitution, just like our Bill of Rights. And Indonesia has kind of been on a democratic journey. And I think it's important, I think, to recall that Indonesia has not always been on a democratic track. In fact, seldom has been on a democratic track. And I, for one, I think that Indonesians have come to like democracy. I think they like electing their officials. I think they want their officials to be accountable to them. I think they want redress for human rights and other kinds of abuses. And most of all, they're against, or let me put it this way, they are for integrity in government. They are against corruption and malfeasance.
Well, I think,
and I think the broad number of Indonesians really want Indonesia to proceed on a democratic track.
well, I think one of the things that's really important, Al, for our viewers to appreciate and to understand is that, if I heard you correctly, this rather recent track that Indonesia is on really started about 1999. So, you know, we're at a very early stage in what promises to be a long road towards democracy, and we all know as Americans that road is not always smooth. It's not always easy, but from what you're saying, remarkable progress in a very, very short period of time. If we look at our own history as a roadmap, for instance.
I would agree with that, but I think that even polling today shows that 85 to 87% of Indonesians believe that democracy is a better form of government for their country. And that is a very strong number, especially, as you correctly noted, that Indonesia has not been very democratic in its almost all of its independent history. For example, the period of Sukarno, beginning in 1957, he began to assume powers of government on himself. He created something called guided democracy, and later, when that stumbled and proved to be ineffective economically, and his foreign adventures caught up with him, there was an abortive communist coup. The military stepped in and established its own kind of authoritarian government. It was, I would say, semi-democratic. It had democratic overtones, but by and large, the government of President Suharto, although it started out well in the late 1960s and 1970s, I think over time became more authoritarian. It became very corrupt at the end. And I think there were enormous excesses that were attributed to Suharto and to those who supported him.
So what we really have, Al, from the end of World War II, when the Japanese occupation of Indonesia was brought to an end, we have in essence, a revolution against the former Dutch colonial rule that leads into this very difficult authoritarian type government period that, you know, essentially is almost unbroken. I mean, there are little fits and starts with democracy until we get to the beginning of what I call the modern era, which really starts in 1999. Is that roughly correct?
I think that's basically true. I think there was a kind of a glimmer of what we would have called kind of liberal democracy in the early 1950s, but that had been usurped by Sukarno by beginning in 1957. And I think that after that, it was one form of government control or another. Now, that does not necessarily mean that there wasn't progress. There was an enormous amount of development under President Suharto, especially in his early years. I think that what developed and what fell in 1999 was an oligarchic system, one in which President Suharto sat at the top of a lot of special interests and people who benefited by him being there and making decisions on their behalf. And I think that that system fell of its own weight. Many of us, many Indonesian watchers, and I would add our ambassador in Jakarta at the time, were terribly worried that Indonesia would fall into incredible disarray and even break up into several different countries. And it was questionable whether the central government authority could be maintained. None of that happened, I'm happy to say. And maybe it is because Sukarno was successful in establishing a capable and strong central government administrative system that the Indonesian state did survive that bad patch from essentially 1999 through 2001. So I think that Indonesia has been on a remarkable journey. I think that Indonesia has enormous potential, and we have always talked about the potential of Indonesia, and I think that Indonesia's potential is still far from being realized.
Hold on, Al. You know, we've talked about the potential for Indonesia. That is, you and I have talked about it, but we've got folks in the audience here that hear the word potential and they're thinking 17,600 some odd in change islands. How can a country like that have potential? And I think it's important to stress that we are talking about the fourth largest country in the world by population, having an important election coming up here as a and it's not a brand spanking new democracy, but it's pretty close to that based on the history that you've laid out, right?
Unquestionably, but I think it also, in economic terms, the large population of Indonesia, about 270 million people, represents markets. They're consumers.
Well, okay. Now, hold on that one point, because this is very important. What Ambassador LaPorta is saying, and that is markets and consumers. And Al, can you give the audience roughly? Do you know what is the percentage of the Indonesian economy that's in the internal consumption mode, as opposed to exports? Do you know roughly?
I'm sorry, I can't give you that data, but I suspect that now Indonesia's economy is agriculture-based. So you have a strong, let's say, tradition of producing food, producing other commodities, and consuming those commodities. Indonesia has a very strong natural resources base. In the 1960s, 70s, and to some extent in the 80s, oil and natural gas proved to be a very important engine of the Indonesian economy. Today, minerals export is a strong element of the economy. So I think that Indonesia has, with its agricultural base, certainly has a potential also for manufacturing, and there are a number of entrepôts in Indonesia that have done exceptionally well in promoting manufacturing and increasingly moving into more high-tech manufacturing. And I think that Indonesia, with its large population, I think has those capabilities.
Well, I think one of the things that's important to stress, and control room, let's put up visual number F if we could for our folks. This development, this urban sophistication, and Ambassador LaPorta, you may not be able to see it, but our audience is looking at a picture of downtown Jakarta at nighttime, and it's important, ladies and gentlemen, to understand why this election is so important with this democracy. And what Ambassador LaPorta is talking about is a country that has as its business model essentially a consumer-driven economy. And the percentage of the economy, and this is very different, Al, I think you would agree with me, than China. China has a dream to convert its export-driven economy over to a business model like Indonesia, which is consumer-driven. Indonesia's percentage of exports is less than 30%, I think, of its total economy. So, in a sense, Indonesia has the economy that from what you're saying, that China would kill to have. I don't mean literally kill, but you understand. You understand what I'm saying. And that makes the potential for the fourth largest population in the world to grow enormously. And I think, you know, we're going to go to a break here, Al, and when we come back, we'll start talking about the candidates and the significance of what's coming up with this election. But let me leave the audience with this one thought, and that is that just in the last few months, Bloomberg is predicting that the Indonesian economy will rise by 2030 to become the 7th largest economy in the world. And she is now sitting at something like number 16. Now that's a short term. So we're talking about actually like being in the dorm room with Zuckerberg when he comes up with the idea of Facebook. When we're talking about growth of a country over the next decade or two. And then, Al, I don't know whether you saw the Citibank projection for Indonesia by the year 2040 is that Indonesia will be not at the number 7 position, but number 4, ahead of Japan and right alongside of India. And that is a piece of the economic significance of these elections that Ambassador LaPorta is talking about. You okay with that, Al?
I think I would make one point. Part of the democratic reforms in 2001 was the passage of a devolution of government law. And that has been very important during the last decade in pushing not only political and economic authority out to the regions, but it's created real engines of growth outside of Jakarta. So while the Jakarta skyline may be very attractive in modern terms, there's an awful lot of growth going on around the rest of the country.
Very good, very interesting. And ladies and gentlemen, you are watching ThinkTech Asia. I'm David Day, and we are having a conversation with former Ambassador Al LaPorta in Washington, D.C., all about Indonesia's elections, fork in the road. We'll see you on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard, and I host the show.
Let me get something to put under here.
Okay. We're on? Yes. We're back. We're live. We're broadcasting from Pioneer Plaza here in the core of downtown Honolulu. You're watching ThinkTech Asia, and I'm your host, David Day. And we are talking about Indonesia's elections, fork in the road, with former Ambassador Al LaPorta from Washington, D.C. And if you just joined our program in the first segment, we were talking generally about the background of Indonesia and why she is so important in terms of the future here in the Asia-Pacific region and the formation of a democracy in that country, which is by any stretch of the imagination robust. And Ambassador LaPorta, let me ask you if you could paint a short picture for our audience of why we use the term, or you use the term, robust in terms of describing Indonesia's relatively young democracy.
Well, I think that, frankly, as a new and still democratizing country, Indonesia has found really a wellspring of popular support for the fundamental freedoms, especially for things like freedom of association, freedom of the press, controls on military power, and controls on police authorities. I think that also taking a strong approach to anti-corruption. I think that all of this kind of has added up to a situation where the democratic forms of government have very strong popular support. And I think that is being shown in not only this election, but in the previous 4 elections, where Indonesians have turned out in great numbers, either over 60% and above in each election. And I think this election will draw a great many voters to the polls. So we are really looking at a horse race in real terms. And I think right now the election for the presidency on July 9, next Wednesday, is probably too close to call.
Okay, well, let's get into this now. And control room, if you could put up visual number 1 here. And Al, what this picture the audience is looking at is a photograph of the 2 candidates, Prabowo Subianto and Joko Widodo, and they're holding hands, and Mr. Subianto has got his Sukarno-looking dress, and Joko is wearing his what we would call here his simple plaid shirt. And maybe if you could, while the audience is looking at this picture, Al, just give a sentence or 2 describing each one, and then we'll spend some time digging down into the background and campaign and the significance of each one. But just give us while they're looking at these pictures, give us a short description as to how you would see it of each of these 2 candidates.
Joko Widodo, or Jokowi, as he's popularly known, is the governor of Jakarta. And prior to becoming governor of Jakarta 3 years ago, he was the twice elected mayor of a medium-sized city in central Java called Solo, S-O-L-O. Jokowi is a self-made person. His father established a small wood-cutting business in central Java. Jokowi has made that grow into a substantial furniture factory. He is probably not mega wealthy, but he's comfortable, but he doesn't throw his money around, but he certainly doesn't need money to be in politics. I think he has an extraordinarily clean reputation. I think that he has cultivated his approach as kind of a leader who is interested in bureaucratic reform, interested in the common man,
Right.
interested in social welfare. By contrast, Prabowo.
Okay, so let's go back to this visual number 1. There we go. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you could see on the left side of your screen there the other candidate running for president in Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. And so go ahead, Al. Let's tell us about this candidate.
General Prabowo is a retired general. He was at one point married to Suharto's daughter. They are now divorced, although it's notable that his ex-wife has been very active in campaigning for him in the election campaign. Prabowo was the head of the Indonesian Special Forces. He has a number of serious human rights allegations of human rights abuses against him, including suppression of the student demonstrations against Suharto in late 1998 and early 1999. He is alleged to have ordered the kidnapping of 28 student leaders, and many of those are still not accounted for. He is alleged to have been responsible for anti-Chinese rioting.
Let me stop you right there, Al. And control room, if we could put up visual number 6 for our audience here, so that and Al, we're showing the audience a photo of those anti-Chinese riots in Jakarta. So tell us about the candidate for President Prabowo's involvement or alleged involvement in these anti-Chinese, ethnic Chinese riots in Jakarta.
Well, in Indonesia, when times get tough or when the political leaders want to make a case and find diversions, the convenient thing has been to take after the Chinese, especially the Chinese business community. Hopefully this is a thing of the past, and I think that we will not see a recurrence of that kind of thing under Indonesia's kind of newfound democracy. But back during the days of controlled politics and controlled government, the Chinese, especially the Chinese-speaking Chinese populations in Indonesia, were convenient scapegoats. This is not much different than other countries in the region where not only Chinese are scapegoats, but other countries have the other kinds of minority populations that they have scapegoats.
Al, isn't it true that during the Suharto era in Jakarta and throughout Indonesia, that the ethnic Chinese were not allowed to have Chinese names? And if you went into Chinatown, like into Kota, you never saw even an English version of a Chinese name, like Pearl City Restaurant or something like that.
Exactly. The Chinese letters and writing was prohibited. As you mentioned, Indonesians were strongly encouraged to take non-Chinese sounding names. Also, Indonesians, all Indonesians have an identity card, and on those identity card, their people's race and religion were clearly marked. Fortunately, except for religion, that is, other attributes are no longer shown on ID cards. That's another attribute of democracy. But also the Chinese and non-Chinese populations, except for the Hindu populations in Bali, were very largely repressed and kind of controlled. And they were not allowed, or they were only allowed to have Chinese schools under certain circumstances. The teaching of the Chinese language was prescribed, it was limited, and there were other kinds of controls. The irony is that under President Suharto, many of the big business people, the bankers and the industrialists and the big merchants were ethnic Chinese, and they all supported the regime of President Suharto. And these people today largely have wheeled in to support Prabowo because
wait. I guess I don't understand what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is very significant, Al. You're saying that the business, the industrial,
yes,
big mega business support for General Prabowo harkens back to the Suharto era, yes?
Exactly.
And yet you've also said that this General Prabowo is alleged to have sparked or pushed the rioting in the country after the collapse of following the Asian financial crisis in 97, 98. the anti-Chinese riots. So on one hand, you've got the Chinese business community, the big wealthy ones, supporting Prabowo, and on the other, Prabowo has this history of pushing the anti-Chinese riots. Am I missing something here?
Well, it gets more interesting than that because Prabowo himself his mother is from Manado, up in the very northern tip of Sulawesi, of the Celebes.
Right.
And his father was Javanese. And his brother, Hashim Joyohade Kusumo, who is a big businessman, very wealthy from timber concessions and from oil development, has been bankrolling Prabowo's campaign, working strenuously on his behalf. And he happens to be Christian. So he's kind of has a mixed background. There's also a Chinese grandmother in the background there somewhere. So none of this may necessarily be completely logical, but let me just say kind of as clearly as I can, Prabowo kind of represents the return to the old Suharto type system.
Okay, and control room, if we could have
very
photograph
clearly-
number two. Photograph number two. I want, Al, as we end this section of the program, we're going to go to a commercial break. And when we come back, I want to ask you several more questions about Prabowo's throwback to the Sukarno era. And we'll start with this photo when we come back after the break, Al. And this is a picture of General Prabowo riding a thoroughbred horse in some stadium. And this goes directly to the point that you're making. And we'll pick this up when we come back after the break, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching ThinkTech Asia, Indonesia's elections, fork in the road. Stay with us because we're going to pick up right here when we come back.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Amashta, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Watching ThinkTech Asia, and we are talking with former U.S. Ambassador Al LaPorta from Washington, D.C. And if you just joined us right at the break, we were looking at a picture of a man on a horse raising his fist. And this is a presidential candidate, former General Prabowo Subianto. And Al, right at the break, you started to mention something about this particular candidate seemingly being a throwback to the Sukarno era. Why is this photograph so important?
Well, Prabowo has launched an appeal to the Indonesian voters for a return to stronger, more certain government and more positive leadership. This, in some respects, is kind of a reflection on what most people and the voters have felt was kind of weak leadership on the current President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono.
Hold it 1 second, Al, hold 1 second. Control room, photograph number 3, if we could, please, while Al is talking about this. So Al, the audience is now looking at another photo of him on the horse in the stadium. But go ahead.
But what Prabowo has used are the images of Sukarno. He dresses in a white bush jacket that was affected by Sukarno. He's even used old-style microphones in his public appearances to kind of give people of the image, the throwback to the old pictures of Sukarno. He has this excessive pomp and circumstance, was very much reminiscent of the Suharto era. And when Prabowo announced his candidacy, it was kind of like a self-coronation. I am the new leader and I am here. And, and all of this was done with great pomp and circumstance, with the horses and other riders and phalanxes of people in uniforms. And it was really looked more like the 1950s than it did, the 21st century, let's put it that way. But most importantly, what Prabowo has said that he wants to do is terribly worrisome in terms of kind of Indonesia's democratic journey. First of all, he said that he wants to return to the 1945 Constitution. In other words, he wants to undo the amendments to the Constitution from 1999 and 2001 that were largely responsible for kind of enshrining democratic controls or democratic.
Hold on a second. So that would be the equivalent of Nonoy Aquino, the current president of the Philippines, saying, hey, let's forget this constitution that my mother developed after the revolution. Let's go back to the time of Marcos, right?
Exactly. He's also explicitly talked about the need for Indonesia to return to a more disciplined form of government. And he also has uses the term guided democracy, that Indonesia should go back to a form of guided democracy. He has also hinted at a greater involvement for the military in civil affairs. And that shudders down the spines of a lot of people.
Well, Al, does the military support General Prabowo? Has he got them under his wing?
Not entirely. There are people in the active duty military who have some reservations about Prabowo, but have kind of on occasion made some statements that Indonesia needs more discipline in its society and needs greater direction and so forth.
Is there something dishonorable in his discharge or his past from the military?
Well, the whole terms of his discharge from active duty in 1999 have been made public. After the disappearance of the student activist and the suppression of the rioters, and then after the anti-Chinese riots in May of 1999, a board was convened of senior serving military officers, and this was all done according to appropriate Indonesian military procedure, and found him guilty of insubordination, giving improper orders, and so forth, and relieved him of his responsibilities as the commander of the strategic forces and directed his retirement.
Wait, so relieved him of command and directed his retirement.
Yes.
So this is no Indonesian military superstar, is it?
There are still some people, a lot of people who in the military who have supported Prabowo, and a lot of those have especially been critical of President SBY and have kind of lobbied over the years against SBY and have found themselves in Prabowo's camp. Other military officials, including one of the members of the board of that ordered his dismissal, General Wiranto, took his political party, very small political party, and has backed Jokowi. So you have kind of some of the old retired military hands are split on the question of Prabowo. But I think that there's enough kind of substance to the belief that Prabowo, whatever else he does kind of advocate a greater role, a resumption of the large role that the military played in Indonesian society. In other words, being able to occupy civilian government positions in terms of allowing the military to vote, which they're not now able to do because they want to keep under the constitutional amendments, they wanted to keep the military neutral. And also he's talked about undoing some of the provisions of the defense laws that were passed in 2004 and another one a little later on.
Al,
So
we are running tight on time here, and
Okay.
so what I want to do is I want to ask you, I want to get to the ramifications of this election on the U.S. relations. But before I get there, I want to ask you two short answers to two questions. Number one, when this presidential candidate, Jokowi, ran for his current position as the governor or mayor of Jakarta, did he change with his running mate the attitudes or exhibit a shift in the change of attitudes vis-a-vis the ethnic Chinese in that election?
Well, no question, because he is the acting governor of Jakarta while this presidential campaign is going on, is an ethnic Chinese, and he's the first kind of ethnic Chinese to have reached that level in the government. There have been ethnic Chinese ministers, but not on the level of governor or vice governor in Jakarta.
Okay.
So yes, it is important.
Okay.
And I think that Jokowi has made a strong statement for inclusion. He has also upheld an appointment of an ethnic Chinese woman to be a district head in the city. And there was some flack on that. Also, Jokowi has taken a very measured attitude on kind of some of the abuses by the Islamist organizations who have been responsible for human rights and other kinds of civic disruptions in the country. And in contrast, Prabowo has encouraged those very organizations. His party platforms talk about purity of religion, and that's code word for it's okay to go after people who are viewed as apostates or nonconformists or people who are different in society.
Let's go back, control room, to photograph, or if we could, visual number one. And Al, the audience is now going to be looking at the photograph of the two candidates side by side. Short question, because I need a short answer because I want to get into the U.S. relationship. We've got, the audience is now looking at the two candidates. The one on the left, General Prabowo, is the throwback to another era. The one on the right, Joko, is the populist, modernist, if you will, looking to the future of Indonesia, of this democracy. What do the polls show?
The polls show that they are neck and neck, and the poll was released by not probably the highest quality polling organization, but they released a poll on July 1 that showed Prabowo and his running mate winning or getting a share 47.5% of the vote, while Jokowi and his running mate were getting 41.3% of the vote. So that's the first poll that's been released that kind of shows a tip. More generally, kind of the poll of polls and more reliable polls have shown up until now that Jokowi has attracted about 52% support, while Prabowo has attracted 48% support. So that's kind of almost within the margin of error. And there are more or less 10% of the voters who indicate that they are undecided.
So we're at an election that's truly a fork in the road for the country, that's on a knife edge. And when we come back after the break, Al, what I'd like you to do is help our audience understand, we'll just have a few minutes left in the program, understand the ramifications of this election upon relationships, both business and government, with the United States. So stay with us. You're watching ThinkTech Asia.
Aloha, my name is Willow Chang Elion, and I host a show called The Art of Life. We air live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. And what we do is basically we focus on individuals who create a unique sense of place for Hawaii. These are movers and shakers, artists, innovators. They are also traditionalists. They're all involved in the archival process, and they make this place a unique place, one that makes Hawaii a richer place to be. I hope you do join us, and certainly tell your friends about the show, whether they live here or they live abroad. It's a way to give back to our community. We're keeping it pono.
We're back. You're watching ThinkTech Asia, and we're talking about Indonesia's upcoming elections, fork in the road for this country, and we have got to help us with this. Former U.S. Ambassador Al LaPorta from Washington, D.C. join us. And Al is an expert on Indonesia, and so over the course of this program, Al, you've talked about the two candidates, Prabowo, Joko Widodo, and kind of their totally different visions for the future of this democracy. And you've talked about the polling being neck and neck for those folks who just joined us in the show. What are the ramifications of this election upon Indonesia's relationship with the U.S.?
Well, I think a Prabowo win would certainly be very problematical for the United States and for our government. Number one, because I think he is a well-documented human rights abuser. He is not fully accounted for his actions, either in East Timor over the years, or the Jakarta riots, or the suppression of the students in 1998. So I think that is a very big issue. I think the other point is what Prabowo writ large stands for in terms of kind of reverting to the crony capitalism of the Suharto era. I think many people feel, and this is certainly a Washington view, that there would be a kind of a return to a discredited form of government, rampant corruption, triumph of the special interests. And I think that people see that Indonesia's social welfare program and other things will be hurt in that, as well as Indonesia's democratic reforms would be jeopardized. On the other hand, Jokowi, I think, is regarded as kind of ensuring the continuation of open and democratic government. That's what Jokowi stands for. He stands for protecting the common people against government interference and government arbitrariness. And I think that most people feel that the continuation of democratic reform in Indonesia is really predicated on a Jokowi victory.
Okay.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, we just have a few seconds left. I'm going to ask you, I know you're not a betting man, Al. Pull out your crystal ball. I can tell who you want to win. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's a toss-up. I can only say, as other writers have done, that we'll have to rely on the sophistication of the Indonesian voters to see their way through this and to vote for a continuation of democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching ThinkTech Asia. We've been talking with former U.S. Ambassador Al LaPorta in Washington, D.C. About Indonesia's elections. The country truly is at a fork in the road, so we'll have to see what happens. And Al, from all of us here in Hawaii, I'd like to thank you for joining us again, and we'll call on you again for your expertise, not only in Indonesia, but in Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific region generally. Please have a nice 4th of July, Al, and ladies and gentlemen as well. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Al.
very much, David.